So yeah, hold on a second. I don't know, when I talk, sometimes I get kind of nervous, so, if I start saying a lot, just bear with me. Just speaking the truth. But yeah, so I'm here to talk about fear and talk about kind of my testimony, and it is pretty dark. I'm going to be very transparent as I can be, and a lot of it was not all that good. And so, yeah, so I hope you enjoy it. I'll start off with prayer. Lord, I thank you for today. I thank you for these great kids. God, I pray that you would touch each and every one of them in a unique way today, God, that you would just help them to know that this isn't the end. God, this is just the beginning. God, help them to go out and really change this world for the better. Lord, I pray that you would bless this message, that they would each receive something from it, and that we just have an awesome day in your presence. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I grew up pretty normal, I guess you could say. Nice life. We went to church. We weren't that really devoted though. We were very Sunday morning Christians, so we would go to church, would be nice, and we'd act cool. But then on Friday night, my parents would go out with their friends and have drinks, and they wouldn't get drunk or anything, but they were just normal, everyday people. And unless you really knew them, you wouldn't know that they were actually Christians just by hanging around them. And so, but then when I was in fifth grade, we went to Russell Road, and my life really started to change, and my parents especially started to become more devoted to truly living a godly life. And that's the best choice you can make, but it can also come with a lot of harmful side effects too, because we will have trials and tribulation in this world. So my life was pretty much perfect. So not really, but and so in seventh grade we had this this meeting every Thursday night where people that worked in the children's ministry would come together, and we'd just have kind of an encouraging time together where we would listen to music and just kind of meditate and pray, and then kind of share what God was telling us. And I had this amazing vision. So I was in this garden, and there was this huge fountain in the middle, and I was sitting there with Jesus, and he was talking to me, and I could see him from a distance. And then there was a bunch of grass around, and then a ring of trees, and the perspective changed, and I could see this lion, and I could see his paws, walking through the trees, and I could see me in the background talking to Jesus. And so then after that, the perspective changed, and there was this snake, and it started slithering up to me, and it lunged and was inches from my face, and then all of a sudden the lion came out of nowhere and just pounced on it and bit it and killed it. And so I was like, wow, that's amazing. But it really didn't I was like, it was cool, awesome, thank you, Lord. But it didn't really mean as much to me then, and I didn't realize, but it was actually prophetic of what I was going to go through. And so then, I had 8th grade year, and then going into high school, I was really excited, running full speed, and then all of a sudden, pretty much just ran right into a cement wall at breakneck speed. I was in English class, one of the reasons why I don't like English, and I had this vision, definitely not from God this time. I stabbed myself in the stomach with a knife. And I could so vividly see me just blood running down into my lap, and I started shaking, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And you can't just see that and then just be normal, oh, it's good. And so I freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And so then I went to the bathroom, and I was like, oh my gosh, get it back together. And I went home that night, and I started working on homework, and I just could not concentrate. Every time I tried to do something, I would just see that image in my mind, and I just started crying. And my mom was on the phone, and she's like, oh my gosh, I need to go, my son's crying. And I was like, I had a thought of suicide. And my parents, they're amazing parents, if you know them, but neither of them were equipped for that. My mom was good with disabilities, so she was very good at helping people and seeing their true talent. She was good at disciplining, but she was not good at handling emotional turmoil, and neither was my dad. So they had no idea what to do other than to pray. And as the days went on, I saw more and more visions of me shooting myself or jumping off a bridge or being hung, just all kinds of terrible stuff. And then I heard lies just coming into my head. I heard, you are worthless, you're stupid, you're fat, you're ugly, you have no chance in life. Why are you even here? You're not going to count for anything. You're not going to, be anything in life. Why are you even trying? You're worthless. And I just heard day in and day out, after every test, as I'm writing answers to the test, you're not even going to be, a good man. How can you be a good husband? How are you going to be a good father? You're not even worth anything. Why would God even love you? And those were the things I heard every day. And so I was taking a test one day, and after every answer, I heard that. And I was like, after every answer, I was the only one in my entire school that got 100%. And I would have rather failed completely than to go through that. Ben had mentioned how faith, when you have real faith, you kind of live by the acronym. There's fearless, angerless, intimate, tested, and hopeful. But it doesn't come in that order. You want to be angerless and you want to have hope, but it's not until you are tested that you actually experience fearlessness, when you actually overcome that fear, and when you become intimate with God. You can't be intimate without being tested first. And so I definitely want to make that clear that you're going to go through tests if you truly want to be a child of God. I felt like sharing this testimony. The word testimony means to cause to happen again. So when you hear someone's testimony and it's truly from the heart and from the Spirit, you're allowing that power to come into your life if you are experiencing that same kind of problem and experience the same transformation that they did. Let's see. I eventually got to this point where I was like, I don't know what to do, because I would go to my parents and they would say the same thing every time. So I was like, I know if I go there, I'm going to get the same answer that I got the previous 37 times I asked them. If I pray, I'm going to just get upset with myself because I'm going to lose concentration and I'm going to start thinking those terrible thoughts. I'm going to see visions of me killing myself again, and I have no desire to do that. If I try to go to sleep, I'm going to end up crying for 2.5 hours until I finally, just lose consciousness because I'm so tired. I was like, there's absolutely nothing I could do. And at that point, I really didn't want to live. I had no desire to kill myself, but I had no desire to live another day either. And that is a terrible place to be. And it's not something that, words can really allow you to understand unless you go through it yourself. My parents were totally unequipped. They had no idea. We went to counselors, but I never really knew anybody who went through the things I went through. And so they were, helpful, and they all knew people that had gone through what I did, but they had never experienced it themselves. They didn't know what it was like to be me. They didn't know what it was like to see, visions and hear lies every second of every day, telling you these terrible things about yourself. And anybody here either have depression, had depression, or know anybody who's been depressed? Anybody? Raise your hand. Okay. How about if you don't know anybody who's depressed? Raise your hand. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Look around. That's not a lot of people. There are 40 people in this room. Only 3 maybe don't know anybody who's depressed. Clinical depression affects about 5% of the world. That's 1 in 20 people, 350 million. That's more people than the population of the United States. This is a pandemic, and there is no hope for victory over depression without Jesus. So I'll share with you how I finally got over that. So Ben talked to me one day, and he said, my father told me this when I was really young. He said, Ben, what's Satan? He said, well, he's a liar, Dad. He said, so if he's a liar, can he tell the truth? He's like, well, no. He said, so if he is the father of lies and everything he says is a lie, then you know that the opposite of that lie is the truth. And so then it was in that moment that I realized that every time Satan was telling me that I was ugly, he was saying, you are a child of God. You are made in his image. every time he said that I was worthless, he was saying, no, 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 you are worth Christ's death on the cross. But I don't want you to know that, because if you know that, you will understand the power that you have, and that would be devastating for me. He said, you're stupid, but he's really saying you have the mind of Christ. And it's like, whoa, when you finally realize that, everything he's saying to you is really the truth, just, turned around to try to prevent you from seeing that. And so that's how I finally realized, wow, that's who I am. And one day I was going up to Michigan for a mission trip, and my dad went into McDonald's, and I was like, hey, can you grab me some ketchup? And he's like, sure. And he came back, and he forgot about the ketchup. And so I was like, oh. So I went in, and then on my way into the store, I heard, Satan say, he doesn't care about you. He forgot your ketchup. Like, who would do that if they, didn't care about you? And so, but then I realized, I said, hey, no, that's a lie. I said, Satan, get behind me, because I know that my Father loves me almost as much as my Father in heaven loves me, and you can have none of that. So thank you, Satan, for reminding me that I am so loved and so dear, and I pray that you would just get out of my face. So that was really cool. Because lies really keep us from our identity, but once we realize that they're lies, they have, only the power to remind us of who we really are. So now I just learned to reverse engineer everything that I hear. And it's great, and he doesn't really talk to me that much anymore because I've learned that. So yeah, just whenever I would hear those lies, I would just verbally declare, no, that's not the lie. This is the truth. Thank you for reminding me of that. And it really reminds me of where it says that, he will make your enemies your footstool, because as you realize that each of those lies are just keeping you from the truth, you can just, step right up them and get closer to God. But yeah, so my, my world was perfect and complete, and I had, a love for God, but it wasn't a very big love. And I was pretty much independent, like they were talking about. And so God said, I want to use you in a big way, and I can't do that with you being in your nice little bubble. So he had to pop my bubble, he had to destroy my world so that he could make his will compatible with my life. My life was too noisy to hear what he had to say. It reminds me of, let's see, right here. In 1 Kings 19, Elijah is standing on this mountain, and he goes out, he says, go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And so as he stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After that, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after that, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard that, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It's oftentimes we have to go through the terrible wind and the pain of an earthquake and the heat of a fire before we can realize that God's trying to speak to us. Because he doesn't speak normally in very loud words, he speaks in a gentle whisper. And if we don't have the ears to hear that, we aren't going to know that he's there talking to us. So he had to definitely refine me and allow me to hear that. But yeah, so those kind of trials are what brings intimacy. I had depression on and off for about 3.5 years, and so I was either living under the fear and the weight of depression, or living under the fear that I would one day experience it again for 3.5 years, and that is a very long time to go without help. But once I got that, it ended, I would say somewhere around October, November. And then in December, I went down to Alabama. There was this youth mission thing that our friends, Charlton and Christy Thompson, have established down there. It's like a family, like rehab house type thing. So they go down there and they just bring in families, because there's a lot of men's houses and there's a lot of women's houses, but there's no ones for families, for husbands and wives, or for just mom and children who need help. And so that's what they established. And when I went down there, you could just totally feel the presence of the Lord in a way that you don't really feel here as much in churches. And it was awesome. But they prophesied over me, and they said, you are going to go to the nations. You are going to, stand before kings. You are going to pray for the sick to be healed and for the dead to rise and all these amazing things. And I was like, whoa, I was going to be an engineer. Like, how is that compatible with anything that I had thought I was going to be for the rest of my life? And that was kind of a defining moment where God said, no, you can be that, and you would be great at it, but that's not who I want you to be. I want you to go to the ends of the earth. I want you to tell people that I love them. I want to tell people that you love them. I want them to see value in themselves. I want to see value in who I say that they are and who I am to them when they truly come to know who I am. And so just recently, in the past 3 or 4 months, I've been seeing more visions of the lion that I saw, 5, 6 years ago. And so, let me see if I can find it. Here we go. So, the lion and I were running through, and this is kind of like talking about the depression I had. The lion and I were running through this like savanna. We were out in like Africa, and we started getting farther apart. And then out of nowhere, this black lion, solid black lion, appeared and lunged towards me. And I began to run towards, Jesus, the big lion. And he started charging the lion, the little lion, but the black lion got around him and sidestepped him and started chasing after me. And so he pounced, his claws were out, he was about to get me, and then all of a sudden, Jesus comes in, tackles him, saves the day. And I just watched as he bit into his side, and it literally just turned into smoke and went away. And I was like, as I was thinking about it, I realized that Jesus had let the lion get around him. He could have just been like, nope, you're done. But he let him get close to me. He let him get inches from my face. And I said, why did you let him do that? And he said, I let him get close enough to you that you knew that you couldn't make it on your own. So, yeah. And then, let's see, there's something else. I had this vision where I was sitting on the back of the lion, just kind of like resting on the side, and he was just breathing, and I could feel his heartbeat. And then all of a sudden, Satan started knocking on this barrier that I could see in front of me. And his side was made of pure light. He couldn't actually see me. He just knew I was in there, and he was pounding to try to get to me. But as he started pounding, the pounds started to blend in with God's heartbeat, and they slowly drowned out. And I couldn't hear him anymore, but I could still see him. And so that was just like amazing to realize, that wherever I go, I am with the lion. I am totally protected under his wing. And so that was really awesome to be able to see that. Yeah, so I would just like to leave you with this assurance. I heard this a few weeks ago from God. Every now and then I'll write letters from God to me, and I think it's really cool, like if any of you ever want to start doing that, because he told me some amazing things. He said, you're about to enter into a new place, a new realm where you will experience unbridled favor and joy. Doubt will be a thing of the past, and our mutual delight will be in each other. We will experience communion, which means with union, together, and you will occupy a new land far above the reach and influence of Satan, and experience my unabridged kindness, love, and joy in unprecedented and unimaginable magnitudes. I love you, and there's nothing we cannot do together. Come to me, and I will give you permission to live in my fullness. So.